That's for sure. So thank you very much. First of all, I have to apologise. My voice, I conveniently lost my voice this morning. So don't ask me any difficult questions, please. I'm from WWF-UK. I lead our engagement on MSP in the UK, and I also co-chair our network of WWF colleagues who work on MSP across Europe and indeed across the world. So we're very engaged in MSP. We're a big fan of it. And I'm going to be spending the next 15 minutes or so just gathering together and reflecting on some of our experiences across Europe and seeing where we are now and where we thought we would get to by this point in time. So if we think back to the good old days of marine management, I call it the pre-MSP era. The simple truth was that sectoral management was leading to environmental conflicts, was leading to conflicts between activities, and the ecosystem was suffering as a result. And all the projections show that the seas around Europe are only going to become busier as a result of human activity. So there is a need for MSP, for systems of spatial planning, to holistically look at areas of sea and consider the most appropriate ways of using them. So it's fair to say that although MSP is relatively new, there's already a lot that's going on at the moment across different countries, across different timescales. There's huge amounts of MSP processes, a lot of effort, a lot of engagement going on. As Bud Ehler would say, we have 102 countries or something doing MSP around the world, from Panama to Paraguay, from Norway to New Zealand. But how effective is it? And what is good MSP? And what good MSP means probably differs from person to person. That's more of a subjective and an emotional and a political subject than actually purely relying on the evidence and GIS-based systems. So again, it comes back to what's previously been said. Actually, MSP is as much about the people and the politics as it is about the evidence and the technology. So, as with other organisations, I'm sure, WWF has been sort of trying to get a sense of what good MSP looks like from our perspective. And actually, it comes back to what Rona was saying about can we judge whether a planning process is ecosystem-based or not, and what does that actually mean? And so, for this presentation, I called up some of my fellow European WWF pandas, and I just said, actually, tell me what stage of MSP are you at in your country? How engaged are you? How optimistic are you? And actually, what can you tell me about the way that marine spatial planning is going in your countries that we can gather and share? Because WWF actually has quite a unique position in the sense that we work across these regional seas, and we do have the ability to share our experiences of MSP processes that are further advanced to help colleagues and planning authorities in the countries that are just beginning. So I guess I wonder if Ludovic and other MSP practitioners have a sign like this on their desks. Basically, to me, it falls back to the fact that actually a lot of MSP is about expectations. At the start of an MSP process, everybody has really high expectations of MSP. And that's understandable because, in theory, MSP is a great thing. It's a great tool. It can look at a marine area in the round, consider what the environmental values are, what the economic and social values are, and what the best way of using marine space and time should be. But actually, too much expectation can be a bad thing. And actually, one of my reflections from talking to colleagues is actually a lot of work goes on early on in the MSP process to manage those expectations, to actually set out what marine spatial planning can do, what it should do, and what it can't do. And actually, a lot of our experience of MSP is related back to the expectations that we had at the start of the process. And actually, those expectations go on a bit of a roller coaster ride as we go through the MSP process. We go from very high levels of expectation and optimism right down to a pit of despair, and then we come back up to somewhere in the middle as the planning cycle finishes and begins again. But I'll come back to expectations a little bit later on. So when I was talking to my fellow MSP gurus, I was asking them kind of roughly 3 key questions. Is MSP in your country or your regional sea where you work, is it forward-thinking? Is MSP supported by stakeholders, and is there a process for engaging stakeholders in the MSP process? And also, the third one, last but not least, is MSP ecosystem-based, as we would define it? And I'll come on to each of those 3 in turn and give you a flavour about what they said. So firstly, talking about MSP as a forward-looking process, and that's common sense. We want MSP to do more than just describe the status quo and describe what's going on at the moment. MSP needs to develop a vision, a forward-looking vision for 20 years, 25 years, 50 years even into the future, and it needs to describe a pathway or tell a story about how we're going to get from where we are at the moment, of environmental decline, of sectoral conflicts, etc., to where we want to be in the future. And WWF can help with that. We've done a lot of work at the regional sea scale developing the idea of future trends. So we can project some economic, social and environmental factors beyond the present time into the future and actually see what's likely to develop, which sectors are likely to grow, which sectors are likely to decline, and where we might be at the end of the planning process. So, for example, we have the MedTrends project in the Mediterranean, which released its report in 2015, showing the projection of different maritime sectors in the Mediterranean over the next 20 years. And that's a really useful piece of work for MSP practitioners across the Mediterranean. It encourages regional transboundary cooperation that we've already heard is so essential. And also it just gives a bit more of a tool to help spatial practitioners develop scenarios to help develop a sectoral and ecosystem-based policy. So we come out with maps such as this for the Mediterranean, which shows the development of other activities as it relates to fisheries, for example, showing where fisheries are likely to come into conflict with new and developing activities in the future. We also, this year, did a very similar piece of work in the Celtic Seas. So we have a Celtic Seas partnership, which is organised by WWF and involves a number of other partners. And we also created some scenarios for the future development of the Celtic Seas in combination with stakeholder interviews. And we looked at what was going on at the moment versus different scenarios which favoured either environmental priorities or local community-based ownership of marine resources. And each of those scenarios has a different level of economic, social and environmental aspects. And that was released this year. And then coming back to the Baltic Sea region, this is kind of where the Future Trends work began back in 2010, and WWF around the Baltic came up with a very sort of groundbreaking, I would say, report looking at the future trends in the Baltic Sea. And it seems to be the case that a lot of the best regional level work on MSP does come from the Baltic. And certainly you guys you've got some good experiences working through HELCOM and VASAB, and you've developed some very good guidelines and mechanisms for looking into that future scenario. I would say potentially also that the UK is doing some good work on this, trying to develop options and scenarios looking into the future. The second one is how can you tell whether the MSP process is supported by stakeholders? This is me as a happy stakeholder, so trying to encourage other stakeholders to get more involved in MSP. If you don't take your stakeholders with you on that journey, your MSP process is almost doomed to fail, I would say. And actually, stakeholders also have the expertise, and in many cases, they have data and evidence to support your MSP process. Certainly, again, from talking to WWF colleagues, this very much varied across Europe. You know, some MSP processes are at a very early stage, and the stakeholder groups are just being established. Other countries have a very much more well-established set of stakeholder mechanisms. And in general, I think most countries have recognized the need to involve stakeholders at an early stage. The mechanism by which that happens does vary, whether that's a national group or a regional or local group. The involvement of other government departments also varies. Actually, one of the things going back to the future forward-looking approach is that actually a lot of the initial plans only really set out the status quo, partly because it was a very new process and everybody was still learning, but also because other government departments weren't as invested in the process as the government department that was leading the MSP process. And actually, when they came to see the drafts, certainly I can speak from experience in the UK at least, that other government departments were quite reluctant to accept some of the more ambitious spatial policies because it contradicted what they were doing at the moment. But actually, having the support of government departments from the first stage of MSP, as you build the evidence and the issues and talk to stakeholders, that gives them a sense of ownership. So there are a number of countries that actually are doing good work on MSP in relation to stakeholder engagement. France, for example, has got a very good relationship with its stakeholders, I believe. UK and Germany as well. And also at the regional seas level, projects such as the ADRI-Plan projects in the Adriatic Sea have been warmly welcomed, certainly by WWF colleagues who work in them. And thirdly and finally, the ecosystem-based approach. And I'm not going to talk about this in great depth because we could unpack the ecosystem-based approach for 2 days. And I know there is a session on it tomorrow, which I'm very interested in it. But for me, at least, I would just point out that for us, it's more than just protecting biodiversity and establishing MPAs. It goes much further than that. And for us, it's more fundamentally about the consideration of the environment in your sectoral policies, and actually the understanding that a healthy environment should be the basis of a healthy economy and a healthy society. And it comes back to values. You know, as stakeholders, as politicians, as practitioners, what do you see as the priority for your marine area? And actually, if you see a healthy environment, as Rona mentioned, as a priority, then everything else flows from that. For example, in identifying areas for offshore wind energy, as Per will mention in a moment, you know, can we say that those areas have been identified, including environmental and social constraints, avoiding the most sensitive areas? And then when the wind farms actually are developed, can we say that we've used or recommended the best possible mitigation technology to avoid those environmental impacts happening before they occur? Again, different countries, I would say, received different feedback on the level to which they are ecosystem-based. I think there is a general sense that a lot of MSP plans and processes say the right things at the very high level and have very good strategic objectives, but actually the sectoral policies, which is the reality of planning, to be honest, actually they are still quite heavily development-focused and perhaps would not meet our criteria of what ecosystem-based management looks like. So finally, going back to the expectations graph. I've stolen this from a model of how technology develops in society. So actually, when you get a brand new bit of technology, a bit of social media, everybody gets really excited about it. You get into this huge peak of expectation, and then actually you realize, you know, as we're going through the process, you know, there's a lot of investment required, a lot of time, money, and effort. And actually, so often in the MSP processes that I've been involved with, you know, there's always a point at which you worry about what's going to happen and what the plans are going to say. And actually, if you're carried through that process, you can be brought back up as stakeholders, and you end up somewhere near the plateau of productivity or the slope of enlightenment. And actually, that process begins again. So, I mean, in conclusion, I would say that actually that expectation relates to one single cycle of MSP. A lot of countries haven't even started their first cycle. A lot of countries are just starting their second cycle. And the key thing for us, I think, is to make sure that we have a direction of travel and that we're learning the lessons of the cycles that have gone before, and we're sharing experiences about what ecosystem-based marine spatial planning looks like. So, thank you very much.